Hey guys, Enigmatic Mr. L here. A few years ago, I ranked the Fire Emblem games according to my least and most favorites. And now that I've replayed some of the games more times, I've now actually completed Fire Emblem Gaiden and Mystery of the Emblem. And of course, Fire Emblem Engage released a little over a year ago. Now the dust has settled on that game. I think it's fair and accurate to judge that. So I just thought it'd be interesting to take a look back, see what's changed, what's remained the same. So yeah, with that out of the way, let's just get started on the list. Starting with Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light. I think I was too soft on this game last time, honestly. It's so janky, clunky, and outdated, mainly just in like the user interface, in part due to being an NES game, plus item management, inventory, that's just a pain. I don't think I can personally give it anything higher than F tier. Last time I gave it D tier, but it's fallen even farther from that into F tier. I've now played Gaiden, and it retains all the jankiness, all the clunkiness of Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon, The Blade of Light, due to them both being NES games. But now it has low hit rates and terrible map design. So, yeah, both of these games, they're not great. Mystery of the Emblem tried in part to be a remake of Shadow Dragon The Blade of Light, but in order to fit everything onto the cartridge, it cut out some chapters, cut out some characters, and just in general, this game was not designed with mounting and dismounting in mind. It makes that a worse experience. Then in book 2, you end up doing something like, oh, you didn't collect all 17 MacGuffins, so you don't get the true good ending. Yeah, just F tier. Genealogy of the Holy War, just the maps are so large and trudging through them, like for each map taking over 3 hours, over 4 hours, maybe like over 5 hours. They just end up becoming like a slog to go through. People praise the story of Genealogy of the Holy War, but I think it has it's way more problematic than most people think it is. Like Sigurd and Deirdre's romance being such an integral part of the game, it just feels rushed, underdeveloped, and unbelievable. And there's just heaps and tons of exposition dump about people, places, and events happening off screen now, or that did happen off screen, just difficult to keep up with, especially on a first playthrough. F tier. Thracia 776 has some of the most like obtuse uh, guide and chapter requirements, character recruitments, or just general knowledge that the player like should do in general. Like, how is the player supposed to know to like buy 14 door keys ahead of time in preparation for end game? Or the character like Ilios is like, oh, you can recruit him, but only if you talk to him at the Pegasus Knight Karen and if Olwen is dead. And neither of these two characters have any sort of prior established relationship to Ilios. There's stuff like that, and plus, just when you get to the end game, when you have to split up your army into like multiple sections, and there's no way to directly control who starts where. You can do some indirect means if you deploy, undeploy like certain units in previous chapters ahead of time, but most players aren't going to because it's such a hassle. Plus, just the infinite range berserk staff users, infinite range sleep staff users, infinite range silent staff users. Just the end game in general, I think, just falls off a cliff with its like map design and things like that. F tier. The Binding Blade has the hit rates of Gaiden, so none of your units, none of the enemy units can hit the broadside of a barn. Roy is definitely the weakest or like the worst main Fire Emblem Lord in the series. Maybe Lyn is an exception, but at least you can bench Lyn for most chapters. And of course, the enemy reinforcements, they were made by the devil himself. Like these ambush spawns, the enemy reinforcements that attack on the same turn they spawn, are I think the worst in the series. So for those reasons, I gotta put it in F tier. The Blazing Blade story, it might seem like appealing at first, but the more you look at it, the more you analyze it, the more it just falls apart with plot contrivances, plot holes, unaddressed issues, and even just like on a first playthrough, Nurgle, the main antagonist, he doesn't really appear like all that interesting at first. You really have to go out of your way to like a Gaiden chapter within a Gaiden chapter in like a mode that you only lock after beating the game once to do anything that gives them a compelling backstory. The difficulty is way too rigid. Normal mode, Eliwood or Hector are both far too easy. And then hard mode, it's not the most difficult thing in the world, but reduced deployment slots and reduced EXP game means you really just rely on juggernauts like Marcus for the early game, and then later you rely on like the early pre-promotes like Hawkeye, Harkin, Pent. You rely on them. There's just little to no incentive to train units. So F tier. Sacred Stones. Seth just breaks this game wide open. He's way too powerful. He starts strong. He only gets stronger. He just kind of completely demolishes, destroy any aspect of challenge the game once had. So, F tier. Path of Radiance. The voice acting is terrible. The game overall is just too easy. And of course, enemy phase takes forever. Even if you turn animations off, there's still like a little bit of them. There's no skip enemy phase button yet, or any way to like speed through it. So, F tier. Radiant Dawn. The characters are just very underdeveloped, both the Dawn Brigade and like the Grail Mercenaries after returning. The Blood Pact is like textbook definition of plot contrivance. And then just the maps in general. The Dawn Brigade maps, they're terrible because you have so little, like, few to none good units worth training, worth developing up. The Grail Mercenaries, once hard joins, he just completely trivializes those maps. And then you get into part 4, where there's just an annoying amount of enemy reinforcements. So, F tier. Shadow Dragon, it's bland, it's ugly, it has the most forgettable story in the series, in my opinion, and complete lack of support conversations just means the cast is like extremely underdeveloped. So, F tier. New Mystery of the Emblem gave us Chris, and in doing so, it set the path for avatar worship and player pandering. So, for those reasons, I have to put it into F tier. Fire Emblem Awakening has very bland map design. The difficulty is too rigid. Hard mode's too easy, but it still has annoying ambush spawns. The characters just feel very like tropey, and it has some overpowered mechanics like Gale Force and Nosferatu tanking. F tier. Birthright is very bland, both in its story and its gameplay. The story just kind of whatever. The writing's still bad. And then in gameplay, you just have Ryoma solo maps or semi-solo the maps. They're not really that interesting. F tier. Conquest is very frustrating, mostly in its story, but also in the map design as well. The story, I think, is the worst in the series, in my opinion. Maybe Shadow Dragon's worse. It's more forgettable, but this is definitely more like most frustrating in the series. Even like map design, it's not even all that great. You got very annoying maps like Ninja Hell, Fox Hell, Fuga's Wild Ride, and I think Chapter 26 with Iago and his status stabs, very annoying. F tier. Revelation, the story is just filled with plot contrivances, gimmicks, things that just don't make sense, plot holes, just filled with a bunch of nonsense. And then the gameplay itself has very gimmicky maps like the elevator map, the snow map, the Chapter 7 map where you just walk into a room blindly, like in the dark. They're just very slow and tedious to play. F tier. Fire Emblem Echoes, Shadows of Lynchia is a faithful remake of a terrible game. It's kept all the problems of that game. The hit rates are garbage. The map design is garbage. Cantors just spawn an overwhelming amount of enemies they're annoying to deal with. Witches teleport, like warp in to like kill or severely weaken one of your units if someone else kills them. Alm has this big story arc set up, like he becomes the ruler, like the leader of his army, and causes a problem. But he's not of royal blood. Can he really do that? And then, JK, he actually is Rudolph's son. He is royalty. It undermines a lot of message. Celica's interaction with Jeddah was changed a lot from Gaiden to the point where she's much less sympathetic and likable. So, F tier. Fire Emblem Three Houses is a game you can tell really needed more time in the oven, even though it was delayed twice. All three routes just feel very similar to one another, both in terms of their story and in terms of like their maps and gameplay. Dimitri's route and Claude's route are more or less the same thing, just some minor differences, a few maps here and there, a few story differences here and there. And then Edelgard is the same thing, just kind of told from her perspective. Your units might start in like differing positions. The monastery just becomes such a slog to deal with after each chapter. If you want to like maximize everything, you can be like end up visiting it like 3 or 4 times in between missions. It's just such a pain, such a slog. Plus, the game's just very ugly. F tier. Fire Emblem Engage has a bad story. F tier. Now we got the spin-offs games. BS Fire Emblem, literally unplayable, unfinished. F tier. Tokyo Mirage Sessions. You take enemies seriously once. That is the first time you encounter them. Then you find out what their weakness is. You never take them seriously. They're never a threat again. The only real difficulty comes in like the boss fights, which are such a difficulty spike. They can reach the point of like frustration. F tier. Both of the Warriors games just make me wish I was playing like an actual Fire Emblem game, since they lack the strategy and tactics of them. Or even if I wanted something more fast-paced and quick, I would do something like a platformer. F tier. Fire Emblem Heroes is just fan service, the game, like Lynn and her swimsuit alts or whatever that. Plus, some players end up spending like $1,000 on it. The only other Fire Emblem games in the series end up doing that, or if you want both the Tellius games. So, yeah, this is my Fire Emblem tier list. Happy April Fool's Day. If I were to actually rank the games according to how I view them now, the tier list would probably look something like this. Yeah, this is more accurate. Fire Emblem Awakening is still my favorite Fire Emblem game, even if it is just due to like nostalgia. Fire Emblem Heroes is the least of the games I played. I did play Tokyo Mirage Sessions, or not Tokyo Mirage Sessions, BS Fire Emblem game, thanks to New Mystery of the Emblem, its mode. It was all right. It still kept Fates as one game. Just the things I liked and disliked about that are generally consistent between all 3 routes. And I did include the Warriors games on here because I've barely played them. I don't think it'd be fair to judge them. So yeah, this is my actual tier list. All of the problems I mentioned in like my April Fool's section, they are actually my real gripes that I do have with these games. But just goes to show you, if you only focus on the negative, you can make pretty much anything look bad. And conversely, if I were to only focus on the positive, I could have just placed everything in S tier. I hope you enjoyed. As always, thank you so much for watching. This is Enigmatic Mr. L signing out.